Hi, I'm Martin Colthorpe, Programmer of Events as part of the New Dutch Writing campaign. New Dutch Writing is a programme of events, workshops, residencies and publishing projects which support Dutch writing and its translation. This is the third and final event in our series, and it's a great pleasure to welcome Rodaan al Galidi and his translator, Jonathan Reeder, and they'll talk about their book, 2 Blankets, 3 Sheets. They'll be in conversation with our chair, Rosie Goldsmith. Rosie is a journalist and broadcaster and the presenter of a huge variety of literary events at festivals around the UK and internationally. For the BBC, she's presented programmes including Crossing Continents, Open Book and Front Row. Rosie is the founder and director of the European Literature Network and chair of judges for the EBRD International Literature Prize. This series is jointly supported by the Dutch Foundation for Literature and Flanders Literature. We're very grateful to the National Centre for Writing and their Meet the World series for partnering with us on this series of events. Do let us know what you think using the hashtag @NewDutchWriting and enjoy the event.
Welcome everyone, welcome wherever you are. My name is Rosie Goldsmith and welcome to this discussion about this terrific book, 2 Blankets, 3 Sheets. It's been written by Rodaan al Galidi and translated by Jonathan Reeder. It's just been published in English by World Editions. Now, through the wonders of modern technology, you're able to join me here at home today, and so are Jonathan Reeder and Rodaan al Galidi as well. Now, you're both at home, but you're not in my home, you're in your homes in the Netherlands.
Right. Yeah.
Rodaan, where are you?
I am in Zwolle, in the middle of Holland.
And what's it like? What can you see out of your window?
I see a street and 2 kids playing outside, and the weather is a little bit humid, but it's very warm.
Good. Well, still in lockdown. That's all of us, I think. Jonathan, how about you?
Yeah. I'm in the middle of Amsterdam, and I'm looking out onto a beautiful elm tree that's just been the home to a family of blue jays, and they had 5 little blue jays, so it was like watching a live version of Springwatch out of our living room window. We watched them hatch and be pushed out of the nest.
But I'm going to really miss all these insights into these homes. I think the new normal comes, but we'll see. We'll have to try and keep some of this going as well. It's really fantastic to be with you. Now, just some background as well to both of you so that everybody knows a little bit more about the book. And then we're going to talk about the book and the Dutch and language and translation, and about this labyrinthine asylum system in Europe. Now, Rodaan al Galidi is a poet, he's a novelist, he was born and brought up in Iraq, he is an engineer, and has been living in Holland since 1928, and that is actually the story. Jonathan Reeder is a translator from Dutch, he's translated a lot of fiction, and also classical music and libretti, and he's also a professional musician. So everybody has big lives. I'm sorry to condense them into such small sentences like that. But congratulations to both of you on this book. It's both of your books now. And as I said, it is a really terrific read. It's a great read with very memorable characters and a very gripping story as well. Now, I've got to ask you, Rodaan, straight out, what is this book? Is it your story? Is it Samir Karim's story? Is it a travel log? What is it?
I don't know, because I want to write book about everything I saw when I left Iraq until I left the refugees camp in Holland. Everything. I didn't want to make a story about the refugees in Europe and Holland. It would be very boring. A traveling book is very boring always. But you know, the experience in the life, and that people read it and make the journey with me, but not on the earth, but in the pages of the book.
It's a very, very special book, and I can't recommend it highly enough, and I genuinely mean that. I'm going to be sending it to my mum straight after this event today. And I think Jonathan's mum is also reading it, isn't she, Jonathan?
Yes, she's finished it and she's a big fan of it. It's her favorite book of the year.
I have two mothers now as readers.
There
See?
you are. Genuinely. And it's been a bestseller in the Netherlands as well. And that's really fantastic. But it's also extraordinary because it is very critical of the Dutch and the bureaucracy, if you like, that is incorporated into this Byzantine asylum system. But it is, as you say, it is fiction. It is basically fiction. It's the story of Samir Karim, and he's the refugee storyteller, the I storyteller. And he arrives at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam. He arrives at in 1998, the same year that you arrive, and he has a fake passport. And he's already been 7 years scraping a living in Southeast Asia, which is, you know, long enough. And then he arrives and asks for asylum in the Netherlands. And then he spends 9 years in an asylum seekers center awaiting asylum, but also resident permit, of course. So this is the story of Samir's life, and it's the story of his encounters with Dutch bureaucracy, basically. Would that be a correct synopsis, John?
Yeah. And with Dutch society too. He switches back and forth between the meetings of Samir with the different civil servants that he has to convince of his legitimacy as an asylum seeker, but also with the Dutch people he meets outside in the town where he lives or the places where he's been housed. And that's where the very funny anecdotes come with his these sort of cultural clash comedy farcical events.
Rodaan, this happened a long time ago, and the book covers the whole 9 years, 10 years of Samir's life in the asylum center, and it goes backwards and forwards, looks at life in Iraq and his journey across Asia to get to the Netherlands. How difficult was it to recall all these memories and to write this book? Were you writing all the time as you were traveling yourself?
I cannot live without writing. When I feel alone or weak, I write poems. When I feel bored, I write stories. And when I have nothing to do, I write in daily books. I like words very much, and it makes me very relaxed. And words for me, it look like people around me, not people inside me. And when I say words, that means I throw people outside me or I bring people to me. And when I came to Holland, it's really the most important what happened in my life, because in Iraq, it's very clear. This is the system and this is the society. Very different, two very different things. In Holland, you don't know where is the system and where is the society? Where began the system and where began the society? And is this person in a street, is he a system or a citizen? You know, everybody in Holland, he's allowed to say, I am the system, you are a foreign. And everybody, and sometimes you meet somebody from the system, he don't believe in the system. He said, no, I am a human, I want to help you. That make me very unsure. And still the more important point in Europe, what I love very much and I hate very much, is connection between this system and society. They are together but not. They are friends but not. They are enemy but not. In Iraq, we don't have this art of this mixing things. To be human in 1 hour and to be killer in another hour. That we don't have it in Iraq. You are or a human or killer all the time. And
you also say part of the time in your book that if you bump into one of the staff people from the asylum seeker center, if you were to bump into them on the street in town, they pretended not to recognize you.
Yeah.
And the same thing vice versa went for someone you knew personally. If you had a friendship with them, it turns out they were a staff member or a policeman. When you see them in their official capacity, they also wouldn't acknowledge recognizing you. So it's true. There are two systems. They were either the
Yeah,
system.
and two personalities also. Yeah, it's very funny sometimes.
Yeah.
So Rodaan, after all this time, I mean, you've been in the Netherlands since 1998. How do you feel about the Dutch now?
My meaning about Holland as a human is different than as refugees. As a human, I love this country. If I have the power in Iraq, I will make Iraq kind of Holland. Very strong system, and people following the rules, not the rules following the people, same in Iraq. What was painful for me in Holland is actually make this country very beautiful and very safe country. I love Holland. The only problem now I have with Holland is the weather. Thank you.
We have that problem in England too.
Okay.
Rodaan, you were talking about your love of words and language as well. And you speak so many languages. You've got so many words in your head. And you've had so many experiences. How did you manage to keep it all together and write this down in one book? This book has everything in it, but it's one book.
I always run away to the language in me in the very difficult situations. I'm born in the war in Iraq. I am grow up in another war. I graduated in another war. I ran away from the war. Once I asked my mother, how old are you? She said, 8 wars. I said, in years? She said, yeah. She said, I don't know in years. And the war is very bad, but it's very good teacher to make you alive. You always, when you know the war personally, you have always the hope. The peace teach you to be bored all the time. You need friends in the peace. You need good movies, good lovers, good swim pools, good cars, your own music. But in the war said, no, you are my child. You need just hope and I will love you very much. And without the war, the Dutch people could kill me in the first year in the refugees camp. But the war saved me.
War
I was
saved
very
you.
strong. When I remember the war in Iraq, people dying on the street, people just went to buy ice cream and something happened and they get killed because they was in the wrong moment, in the wrong place. But in Iraq, all the places are wrong, all the moments are wrong. And this war made me very strong and still making me very strong.
You've been in the Netherlands now for a very long time, since 1998, and I know a lot of that time was in an asylum center. So, but you have been in that country for a long time. Do you still feel in your head that you're in Iraq?
Yes, not also my head, but my heart, because Iraq is my country. The people living there are my families, friends, and they are my people. And every time when I living longer in Holland, Holland made me feeling more Iraqis than Dutch. When I make I do my best to be Dutch, Holland do her best to make me feeling I am Iraqi. And that I love from Holland very much. And I hate also very much. It's really, really crazy situation. I don't want to be Iraqis anymore. I don't want to be Dutch anymore. I am now hippie. I don't want any country, any language, any religion. I make 5,000 euro every time I go to Spain 5 months. And I am hippie. Between the hippies, I took my guitar with me. And I am not refugees anymore, not Iraqi, not Dutch. Because I love in Europe, you can escape from any system when you have money. When you don't have money, there is not possible to escape. And I love that very much. In Europe, if you understand Europe very good, you will love it very much.
Now, this book has, as I've said before, it's done really well in the Netherlands. And it's interesting because it is very critical of the Dutch, and it's very critical of the asylum system generally in Europe, because it isn't just about the Dutch, of course not. Now, the ASC, the Asylum Seeker Centre, which is the acronym that runs through the whole book, the remarkable thing about this novel, fiction, non-fiction for me, your story, Samir's story, is that it gives genuine, personal, intimate insight into the life of an asylum seeker and refugee. But you don't just do it in a kind of, oh, how dreadful, how awful, how, you know, how much I'm suffering kind of way. You do it in really quite a light way. You tell people stories, you tell anecdotes, you tell jokes. You're very funny, and it's a fantastic read. And I kept thinking to myself, should I be enjoying this as much as I am?
Look, if you want to be a writer, you must learn from, not from another writers, but from the camera. The camera can make you the best writer ever. What do the camera? She's not negative about what she sees, not positive. You just bring it to her. And I exactly, when I was reading a lot of books, I don't like the meaning of the writer. I never like his feeling in the book. I like the story without the writer. And this is in the book, in this book, I use the technique of the camera. You just write what happened without your meaning or, and I think this is the best way to make book.
Jonathan, translating a book like this, there's so myriads of characters and languages, people, anecdotes. I should imagine a bit of a challenge.
Well, it was, except that what Rodaan says, he tells the story not as a sort of a morality story, or what did also strike me from the beginning is he doesn't really have an opinion about it. He leaves us, the reader, to have our own opinion about what goes on. He just tells the story, and he shows us little home movies of videos of the people that he shared the asylum center with, the people that he came across when he was outside, or the staff members. So in that way, the conversational narration of it, since it wasn't editorial in any way, that made it a lot easier. Also, it was very funny. I really enjoyed reading about all these mad people that are around him. And you know what we don't understand sometimes in outside the asylum seekers is that they have up to 40 different nationalities living in one of those centers. 500 people, 40 nationalities and languages. It's not just, you're not just an asylum seeker and they all speak the same language or have the same culture. So that was a bit of a challenge too, because he's got characters that come from Africa. He's got a Russian lady. He's got this wonderful African woman. He's got a lot of Middle Eastern people, but there were 4 Chinese people, 4 Chinese men who kept to themselves. You never really know why they were there. So that was one of the fun challenges of it, is to also be the second cameraman in his narration.
I think Rodaan very gallantly said, it's now your book. Anyway, it's your book, Jonathan.
Yeah. That was I gotta say, he's my dream author, Rodaan, because really it was hands off. I was allowed to check with him with certain things, anything I wasn't sure about, but in that way he gave me complete freedom to just retell the story in English, and that's what I did. And one of the ways that worked really well is that I dictated the whole thing instead of typing it, so it was as though I was retelling the story verbally to whoever would listen. And I think it worked a lot better than a type that came out of my thing.
Wonderful conversational tone as well. You just feel you're sitting, as we are in our homes, just listening to somebody telling stories. And I suppose, Rodaan, that goes back also to, I mean, I know a little bit about Iraqi literature and literature from your region. And of course, there's a lot of verbal storytelling, oral storytelling. There's a lot of poetry, beautiful lyrical language. And to try to turn that into Dutch and then English is again...
To be honest, I want to tell you something. I don't like the Arabic literature, to be honest. Why? Because they are busy to make the language very beautiful. That means the makeup is more important than the face.
The makeup is more important than the face.
Yeah, I love very much the Russian literature.
Russian literature.
The Russian literature, they don't care about the makeup. They don't care even about the face, but what's behind the face. I love that very much. And I love the German philosophy.
So German philosophy, Russian literature.
Yes, and I love very much the English detectives, Sherlock Holmes. From these detectives, the English, they teach me to make the reader reading. Not bored, the line, you must have line. This is English line I have. And I have Russian way of tell the story without your meaning. And sometimes I learn from the German philosophy to give the reader feeling that you are very simple, that you are not intellectual, but somewhere you put some sentences and he said, wow, he's not stupid as I thought, he's very clever. And this I do all the time. This is all the secret I have.
You're very clever, but you're a good satirist as well and a good humorist, I think.
I love you. I love laughing very much.
Yeah.
Because I learned in Iraq, in the war all the time, crying, and the people ran away to laughing.
I'll tell you.
Iraqi people are really very, very good in changing the drama in the same second of the drama to very funny things.
What a gift in difficult times, what a gift. And considering what you've been through, I know that people will always say this about you, but you've got an amazing soul and sense of humor and spirit, and it really comes out. And thank you for that. Well, thank you. Jonathan, I was wondering whether this might be the time for our first reading as well, because now we've been hearing so much about language and about both of your books, the book. Let's have a look at the first reading. Now, this is, I just want to tell everybody watching a little bit about this reading before you and Rodaan do this. Now, Rodaan, you're going to be reading in Dutch, but you wrote in Arabic, is that right?
No, I don't use Arabic language. It's about 20 years I write in Dutch, but I will read 1 minute in Dutch, and the people will hear that I am not Dutch, and what I am reading is sound like Arabic. I would like to make that.
Why not? Why not? Language is a creative.
Because once I had a reading in Holland, and I was reading in Dutch. I was very happy reading in Dutch. And the lady come to me when I was finished. She said, it was wonderful, but in which language was it? She didn't know that I was reading their language. Okay, do you want me to read 1 minute or later?
Just
okay.
No, coming up. I just want to do a little bit intro. This is actually in the Asylum Centre, and for people who haven't read the book yet, this beautiful, gorgeous object here, and it's called 2 Blankets, 3 Sheets. And we're going to talk about the title straight after this reading, because the title in itself has got another story attached to it. But it takes place, most of the book takes place inside this asylum centre, the Asylum Seekers Centre, the ASC, as everybody keeps calling it. And there's, critics have said some extraordinary things about this book, but one is that there's no better insight than into the human cost, if you like, of the European asylum system. And that really this is probably, one of the, people call it a tale for our times. And I think that may sound very grand, but it is. And it's through the personal stories that you tell here. And I just want to read this tiny little bit, which I love so much. For example, making friends with Dutch people outside the ASC was impossible for asylum seekers because they rarely spoke Dutch well enough to make contact. This is why the asylum seekers taught the locals their own language called asylum seeker-ese. This language is, in a nutshell, a few words of Dutch, a few words of English, all jumbled up and put back together in the grammar of the asylum seeker's mother tongue. Russian, Arabic, Romanian, Persian, Kurdish, Portuguese, Turkish, Somali, you name it. Now, this is this book in a nutshell. Now, you two have got a longer excerpt, and you're going to start off, Rodaan, if you would, with some Dutch, your Dutch, and then Jonathan's going to take up the story.
Okay.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you. Daarom leren de asielzoeker de Nederlander zijn eigen taal, het asielzoekers. Het klinkt als een paar woorden Nederlands met een paar woorden Engels, die worden samengebracht en door de grammatica van de moedertaal van de asielzoeker gehusteld Russisch, Arabisch, Roemeens, Persisch, Koerdisch, Portugees, Somalisch, noem maar op. Thank you.
Before I can go further with my story, there's something else important that needs to be explained. The workings of an ASC is one huge misunderstanding between the asylum seekers themselves, between the asylum seekers and the Dutch people who work there. Additionally, you should know that most asylum seekers, I shouldn't say all, are putting on an act. This was amusing for the asylum seekers themselves, but tricky for the Dutch staffers. If someone had said that he had been tortured in his home country and consequently suffered from PTSD, then he kept up the charade in the center. Among ourselves, he behaved normally, but as soon as there was a Dutch person around, even a volunteer, he would act crazy. There was a Syrian asylum seeker named Zuhair. He had told the Dutch authorities that the Syrian Secret Service had tortured him by forcing him to bang his head against the wall. And even now, he still heard the screams of the Secret Service in his head. You wouldn't believe how often Zuhair stood banging his head against the walls of the ASC. At first, he only did this in his room, but his roommates told him to stop because it was bothering them. So he did it in the hallway outside social services. But then one of the staff members came out at the office, angry, and said he was welcome to bang his head against a wall, but not against a glass partition. Then there was Nabil from Iraq. He had told the immigration people that he'd been beaten on the head and since then had terrible headaches. He never asked for mail at reception, only for aspirin. And he was constantly bothering the staff at the medical clinic. Whenever there were Dutch people around, he would groan from the pain, press a tablet out of the blister pack and swallow it with a bottle of water. But as soon as there were no Dutch people in sight, we would see him toss the aspirin into the garbage. After a few months, however, Nabil started to get genuine headaches and would take the aspirin even when there weren't Dutch people around. But the best actor of all was Babak, an Iranian who had applied for asylum posing as an Iraqi. I have no earthly idea how he managed to convince them that he was an Iraqi, seeing as he didn't speak a word of Arabic, let alone the Iraqi dialect. Since he had claimed asylum as an Iraqi, and I came from Iraq, Babak was eager for the Dutch people in the ASC to see us in conversation together so they would believe his story. So I would always have to listen to Babak and pretend to understand what he said. I would nod as he babbled in his unintelligible language. But the upshot was just the opposite of what Babak had intended, because of assuming he came from Iraq, the staff just assumed I spoke Farsi.
Oh, fantastic. So much in this book. You can see from all my little notes here, so many little readings. I said, oh, let's read this bit, let's read that bit. But difficult to choose readings, but that's fantastic. We've got another wonderful reading for later on in this discussion. But the title, let's talk about the title. This is your first novel in English, Rodaan. Yeah. So obviously, you know, it's fantastic that it's such a beautiful cover, fantastic title. But this wasn't the title in Dutch, was it?
The title is Hoe ik talent voor het leven kreeg in Dutch. How I get talent for life.
How I found a talent for living.
Yes, and I was thinking if I put a kind of refugees title on the book, no one he will buy it. And I thought Dutch people like spiritual titles.
Yeah.
And I thought
that
it's very nice to put very spiritual title in the book, and they will say, oh, maybe I will find the Dalai Lama, or maybe I will find some yoga masters here or coaching, and I will put them in the refugees camp. Same thing happened with me. They said, you come to Holland for freedom, and they put me in this building. I will do it with my readers. But Jonathan, he had another idea, and I think he can tell about it.
Jonathan, now the title of this book, Two Blankets, Three Sheets, is not the original Dutch title at all, which is How I Found a Talent for Living. I mean, these are two very, very different videos.
Yeah.
How about this title though? Two Blankets, Three Sheets. I know this is like a mantra throughout the whole book, really. We know
Right.
what it means. Can you just tell us a little bit about that title?
Sure. At the beginning, we were actually planning to use How I Found the Talent of Living, but I actually was a little worried that it sounded like a self-help book, and which is kind of ties into what Rodaan meant in the first place with the Dutch title. And sure enough, the American distributors rejected that title for that very reason. So we, at the very last minute, we were in a little bit of a panic because the book was scheduled to be printed, and the cover had already been designed in this same design, but then with the other title on it, with the man climbing the steps. So we had to quick look for something, and thanks to my absolutely wonderful editor at World Editions, Lydia, we came up with Two Blankets, Three Sheets, a Towel, a Pillow, and a Pillowcase is the official title of the book. And that refers to the provisions of linens that an asylum seeker is given every time he checks into either the reception center or the ASC, and they're expected to respect and care for these items of linen throughout the time they're there, and you have to turn them back in at the end. And so because Samir keeps getting shunted from one center to another, every time he arrives at another, he's given two blankets, three sheets, a towel, two pillows, and a pillowcase, and then has to turn them in when he leaves there, and gets the same thing when he moves to the next place, right? So, and it becomes hilarious because something always gets lost along the way. So there's always this trouble of how am I going to come up with another sheet or replace a lost pillowcase. So that's kind of a shtick that goes through the whole book, but it also kind of exemplifies the obsession with rules, the things that the Dutch society and Dutch asylum seekers system loves their rules. And he was actually punished and docked his weekly pocket money because he turned in one pillowcase too few at one of these things. So they take the rules for their linens very seriously.
And it's obviously a metaphor for all, well, it's a metaphor, it's a loud, a loud shout about the bureaucracy and the degrading regulations and the time wasting and all those extraordinary things. To spend 9 years, and you weren't, of course, there the longest in the, not you, but Samir, but you as well weren't there the longest in the asylum centre. And I think that this is mind-boggling, staggering that people's lives are put on hold in this way. How after all these years do you look back on that time, and how do you...
I don't look back to that time. I still there.
You're still there?
It was really little bit longer than 9 years, maybe 10, because after I left the building, it was some bureaucratic problems. I must go there and there and there and there. It was the longest waiting I ever had in my life, you know. Before this waiting, I was waiting for a nice girl, maybe 2 hours, or waiting for a brother to take me to somewhere, or waiting for a friend, or waiting for the vacation of the school. But the waiting was for me just few minutes, maybe 1 hour, 2 hours, but years waiting. But you are not in the jail, you are not a criminal. I didn't thought about that. It make you crazy. It eats you.
How did you not go crazy? I mean, you talk about in the book about the suicides and the number of people, the suffering and the really awful things that went on. How did you not go crazy?
Yeah, there is in this year there is 8 people killed themselves in the building.
8 suicides.
8 people. And these people, when you see them, you know, oh, they will kill themselves. They are changing. They went down and down, but no one looked to them. There is rules. The people working in the building, the Dutch people, they are very human, better than Iraq or Saddam Hussein or Saudi Arabia, but they don't look to the humans. They look to them rules. If you follow them rules, they don't see you even. But if you don't follow them rules, they see you because you didn't have the rules. And that is really, they are, I don't know how they feel, how I think. I don't know how they changed to this. What kind of book we read to be like that?
Jonathan,
What kind, because...
Jonathan, I know you were trying to get in there, please.
Yeah. Can I add something to that? Just what there's an anecdote in the book, and it's actually presented as being quite funny, but it really isn't. It's when Samir is at the very beginning of his time at the Haarlem ASC, he can't sleep one night, and he goes into the kitchen, the communal kitchen, with a book, and just sits there peacefully reading a book with the light on, and the night duty security guard comes in and says, you can't read here. You have to turn your light off and go back to your room. Well, he shares a room with 4 other men who are trying to sleep. And he says, but why can't I read this book? Those are the rules. Mm-hmm. So he turns off the light, goes out into the hall and encounters one of the other asylum seekers. And they have this little discussion about rules that don't make any sense, but that everyone follows. And the other guy says, just go back in and turn on the light and read for another hour because he won't be back till his next round. It's those kind of things that probably pushed people further and further, closer and closer to becoming crazy.
You know, I was before very proud that the first rule written in Babylon, in Iraq, and now, no, I am not proud anymore. Now I know the baddest thing what happened in Iraq, 7,000 years in Hammurabi wrote the first rules. I hate it now.
Yeah, but some of the other rules that he encounters, I mean, some of them are obviously the whole bureaucracy of getting through this system, and those are rules that are insane enough to start with, like demanding from an asylum seeker. This is one of the things you can't not read when you read this book, is the thing about your birth date. When they ask for your date of birth, and they don't understand that a lot of people from that part of the world don't have an official birthday. They're either 1st of January or 1st of July. And if he says, I don't know when my birthday was, they say, doesn't know when birthday is. And then the next time he has an interview, he says 1st of July, just to give them an answer. Giving 2 different answers, unreliable. It's
I mean, this is all about communication, cultural gap, misunderstanding. Well, of course, it's not just the Dutch, you know.
No.
It's all of us, and I think that's the value of this absolutely wonderful personal journey, if you like. And it's an absolutely jaw-dropping insight into the life of individuals in the asylum centre. I think that's the main thing. And the other thing that really strikes me all the way through this book is that it's about language, communication and translation, because all the different people in the centre, all the different misunderstandings, they come from a lack of understanding of how we communicate. Maybe something is translated incorrectly in a visa application or an asylum seeker application, and thereby hangs a whole person's life if something is translated incorrectly. And then it's about Samir himself becomes a translator and interpreter for other asylum seekers in the center. And it's about Jonathan translating communications thing. I mean, is that the secret, if you like, the secret underlying thread through this book? It's about language. It's about how we all communicate or don't.
I think it's about language, but also about meeting for the human. You have the meeting in the internet, same we are doing, but this is meeting between countries, East, West, meeting between systems, between souls and bodies and hearts. It's what I learned in the building in the refugees camp. I believe now that all the world can be one.
You do believe that?
Yes, and that is happening in the refugees camp.
Because
I do
has
believe,
created
yes,
that
because the people,
global understanding.
yes, because the people, if they don't understand themselves very well, they are very good human with each other.
So it's a lesson for all of us.
Yeah,
really.
lesson understanding is more connection between the people than very good understanding. Because I was friend with some refugees. I was very good friend with some Russian, some African. When I met them after 10 years, and they was very perfect in Dutch, and we could speak very well, we wasn't friends anymore. We was very different. And I discover now the bigger problem in the world that we understand each other very well. We need maybe to make the language very small, then we are very big human.
Yeah, as a linguist, Jonathan, yourself, we're all linguists here. You know, I speak a few languages, and Jonathan, I mean, you've lived in the Netherlands a very long time. What picture do you think this gives of the Dutch, and why do you think this book has been so successful in the Netherlands, even though it's critical?
Well, I think one interesting thing about the Dutch people, I hope I'm not overgeneralizing, is that they do really enjoy being critical of their own system and of their own government, of themselves. They like being critical of everybody, but they don't spare themselves. The Dutch people are very self-critical, and they're almost a little bit, they're horrified by reading this book, but in a sort of a proud sort of way, because look at, you can't believe how badly we've organized this asylum system. And there was a really an uproar about the system a few years ago when there were something like 16 or 26,000, I can't remember, and it's just an incredible number of asylum seekers who had been waiting for more than 10 years for an answer. And there was such an outcry in the Netherlands that they did issue a general pardon and tried to work back all this backlog of it. So I think the Dutch people are not afraid to look at themselves critically. And I think that's why it was such a big success here.
It was very, I mean, it's very funny, of course, as well.
And it's funny. I mean, it's fun, and it's a funny book. You know,
stereotypes, and I mean, I think it would be exactly the same if you came here as well, Rodaan, because you know you would see us as we really are as well. And basically, you're seeing the Dutch, the Europeans. You travel a lot in this book. It is a travelogue as well. You see everybody as they really are. I think that's the if you like, the shocking but wonderful thing about it. You just go straight in there. And I think, you know, there are some funny things, of course. There's these pictures. We're going to have our second reading now, but there is this wonderful passage also about cycling, how cycling is more natural than walking for the Dutch. And there are some other fantastic observations like that. So we have a second reading for you from Rodaan's and Jonathan's wonderful book. And it is really about those cultural misinterpretations, but it's also very funny, and it's a wonderful read. So Jonathan, maybe you'd tell us a little bit about it very quickly and then read away.
Okay. Well, the asylum centers are not closed. The Rodaan has said it's not a prison. People can come and go as they please. At a certain time of the evening, all the doors except the main door are closed, but you can come and go as you like. So people were used to going into town, walking around, talking to people, riding a bicycle, and they get into interactions with the locals. Some people actually become romantically involved. They'll make friends. They learn. They go dog walking with some local people.
There are lots of dogs in this book.
There are lots of dogs in this. There are lots of dogs in this book, and in very funny ways. And I have to just as a little aside, I'd like to say, even though we've talked a lot about how almost inhuman this system is, what the reader or potential readers of this book really need to remember is that the people that Rodaan met, or that Samir describes in his book in the asylum seeker center, are all incredibly lovable. And he tells it really how it is. I mean, they're not perfect, and a lot of them are very flawed, and some of them are dishonest, and some of them have done some kind of unsavory things. But you love every one of them. You love the Russian woman, Yelena. You love the African woman, Christy. You love Wahid, the one of the other sides. So I could go on about it, but they're all incredibly likable characters. And even the Dutch people he comes in contact with are very likable in their own way. If they're on that, like we said earlier, if they're not in their official capacity and as a human, they're rather likable people. So so Samir goes into town for an afternoon to get himself a snack. And this is what happens. I became addicted to lekkerbekjes, batter fried fish, and this also gave me something to do outside the ASC. One day I was standing in line at the fish stall, and the girl working there called out, "Who's next?" What a question. We were standing in line, and naturally the person in front was next. "Me," I shouted from the back as a joke, but a few annoyed faces turned to me as though I'd meant it seriously. "Sorry, mister, you've only just got here," the girl snapped. I left the line. Her surly attitude was enough to put me off lekkerbekjes for good. As I walked off, another girl struck up a conversation with me. Her name was Madalena. She was 25, pretty, and seemed to be the most easygoing woman in the world, because within 5 minutes she repeated the word okay at least 5 times, which is 1 okay per minute. The person who shared his life with her would hear so many okays that he could skate on them, swim in them, sleep on them, and wake up in them. I asked if I could come drink tea at her place. "Okay," she said. "How about tonight at 8? So at 6 o'clock, I took a long shower, shaved my face and armpits, and trimmed my pubic hair. I brushed my teeth at least 6 times and went from room to room looking for an iron. From one person, I borrowed a gold chain, from another, a silver ring. Toby, a perfume thief, offered me 2 kinds, one of which I sprayed all over my body and the other onto my clothes, and I searched high and low until I found dress shoes my size. For the first and the last time, I went to reception, not as an asylum seeker, but as a man with a date." "Aspirin?" asked Rick, the receptionist. "Condoms, please. Do I look like someone with a headache?" "How should I know? You always ask for aspirin." From now on, no more aspirin, only condoms. "Who's the lucky girl?" "A Hollander," I answered proudly. "Really?" Rick said. "Then you might want to take some aspirin along with you after all." I rang her bell at 7:20. "Who's there?" "Samir." "I thought we said 8 o'clock, she replied brusquely. "Hang on." So I stood there. A man with a dog walked by, and I told him I had a date at 8 o'clock, but that I was a little early. A woman peered at me from a window across the street, and I called to her that I had a date at 8 o'clock, but was too early. Another neighbor asked what that asylum seeker was doing down there, and she told her I had an appointment at 8. Gosh, I thought, make a date with a Dutch girl and you get to meet the whole neighborhood. At 8 o'clock sharp, the door opened and many pairs of eyes followed me inside. Not a single okay passed over Madalena's lips. I wanted to call you to reschedule, she said, but I didn't have your number. That's okay, I said. Instead of listening to her okays, I started saying okay myself. I'll leave as soon as we've had our tea, okay? Where should I go now? No, drink your tea first. She bit her nails and snapped at a little white dog in a basket who wasn't doing anything wrong. She tried to turn off the TV with the remote control, but it was already off, and when it went on, she swore at it and switched it off again. If the dog and the television were having such a hard time of it, imagine the trouble I'd be in soon. So I drank my scalding tea in quick little sips. I said okay after okay until the tea was finished, and I was relieved to be outside again. I had a throbbing headache. The 40-minute wait and the 20 minutes in her apartment had worn me out. Back at reception, I took the 3 condoms out of my various pockets and laid them on the counter. Without a word, Rick took them back and slid me 2 aspirins.
Ze was 25, mooi en leed het makkelijkste meisje ter wereld. Want binnen 5 minuten herhaalde ze het woord oké zeker 5 keer. Dus 1 oké per minuut. Iemand die zijn leven met haar deelde, zou zoveel oké's horen dat hij erop kon schaatsen, in kon zwemmen, op kon slapen en in kon wakker worden. Ze praatte en ik knikte, terwijl ik deed alsof ik luisterde, maar dacht aan die gouden oké's die mij naar haar lichaam zou leiden. Dat zeker lekkerder was dan het lekkerwerk.
What a story. What a great book too. Rodaan, this is not your first novel. It's your first novel in English. What are you writing at the moment? And do you think your first novel is going to be translated as well?
I am writing now a book about the beauty, the money, the fascism, and the love. Because I follow the literature now, a lot of people comparing about refugees in Europe. Oh, there is a lot of people coming. But there is no one single writer write about the fascism and Nazis who are growing also in Europe. And I thought I will make it my own way, not very book about the fascism, but with a lot of love, beauty, and money. And because, yeah, it must be a nice book, I guess. This is the people, I want that the people when read it, they laugh a lot and they feel that life is stronger than fascism.
Well, I think considering what's going on at the moment, and I'm not going to spell out what's going on at the moment, the reason we're not all sitting together is because of a terrible pandemic, but also there's a lot of other terrible things happening. And I can't thank you enough for a little bit of beauty and light today, because it's just been really fabulous talking to you. And we must sadly end our discussion there, but thank you to the stars of our show today, to Rodaan al Galidi and to Jonathan Reeder. And do read this book. It is a tremendous read. I cannot recommend it highly enough. I've said it before, I'll say it again until you're tired of hearing it. It's called 2 Blankets, 3 Sheets, and it's published by World Editions. Now, this is the 3rd and closing event in our New Dutch Writing Meet the World series in partnership with the National Centre for Writing in Norwich. All 3 events with the details of all 3 authors and all 3 translators are on the New Dutch Writing website. That's newdutchwriting.org.uk. So thank you from me, Rosie Goldsmith, and cheers, and see you all soon. Bye.